Hi everyone, welcome to another Fractal FX8 video from Chris here at Butterfield Studios. I just wanted to, I did that very long delay block video, which a lot of people seem to have enjoyed and gotten something out of, so that makes me, very happy to hear. And I had wanted to do another long multi-delay video. But the one I recorded was over 2 hours long, and even doing that, I had to skim over some things, and I probably went so fast over a few things that I might have made things more confusing than clear, just trying to be brief. And I think it makes a lot more sense if I do these or do a series of videos about the multi-delay, where I look at different effect types within the multi-delay block. So saying that, I hope to also make it clear where there's some commonality between the different effect types so that you don't have to feel like every single one is completely and utterly different. This first one about the quad tap, which I've done very specifically, even though it's not the first one on the list, I hope will cover a lot of the basics, and it might be a bit longer than the other ones, maybe not. But the idea with this one is to get everybody kind of in on the ground floor of the multi-delay idea, basically, and explain a lot of the common functionality where I can. All right, so before we get started, just to let everybody hear my clean sound, I am playing through one of my custom Gregorius amps through my Hagstrom guitar, and this is the clean sound. So, I like that. Okay. So I might be doing some things a little bit differently insofar as I might be showing you guys the actual signal flow diagram to try to help you understand some of this, because some of this is not only is it unintuitive, it's actually counterintuitive, and we'll see that in a bit. And so I might have to show you the signal flow diagram to help you understand that as best as you can. Some of this you will actually just have to mess with on your own, even after hearing me saying it and seeing examples of it in use, because it is so counterintuitive. The first thing I'd like to talk about is just the pages. We have this master mix. This master mix has a slightly different function with the with all of the multi-delays because we're talking about kind of having at minimum four delay blocks kind of welded together in different ways with different functionality. And so with this master mix page, we have the means to scale, and that's really the best word to use, scale some of the other settings we make on the other pages. So if I come down to a very quick example of that is here's the master feedback. If I come onto the delays page, this shows us all four of our mini delay blocks that we have within this one large delay block. And if we see here, there's four feedback controls, all set to 10%. If I was to set this master mix now to 50%, that would be the same thing as setting all of these to 5%. You will not see these change when you scale this. It's more of a matter of just having the ability to tweak settings. Well, actually, there's two things to note. One is we can set these to be controlled with modifiers, whereas we cannot set these to be controlled with modifiers. So if you want to control the feedback with a modifier or an expression pedal or something in these multi-delay blocks, for the most part, you will have to control that on this master page. So the other thing about that is that if I set this up in a way where I love, and then I realize when I get to rehearsal that I have set the feedback too high or at a gig, I can easily tweak it all down a little bit, up and down, using that. Now, I should point out to you that there are a few features which, when we look at them, are initially going to seem like they do nothing. And or sometimes there's features that look like they're doing things they shouldn't be doing. And some of that relates back to the settings on this master page. And that's just going to have, you're going to have to get used to the interrelation between the master page and these other pages because they are connected. Okay, now on to something a little bit less complicated. We have our diffusion time and our diffusion percent or amount. And we saw this on the other delay blocks. And it's kind of a way to add a bit of reverb. It smears the transients. So what you basically get is more of a wash in the repeats. So here, I will let you hear what that sounds like, just so we can get that out of the way. Now remember, we're going to hear 4 delay blocks at once. One set to a quarter, one set to an eighth, one set to a dotted eighth, and one set to a dotted quarter, which means we're going to get something that's pretty rhythmic. So let's just hear, actually, let me do this. I'll do it once without the diffusion and then once with the diffusion. It helps if you turn on the delay. There we go. Let me just turn this mix up so it's more clear. So here is, again, without the diffusion. All right, and here is with the diffusion. There you go. There's that kind of delay sound. And of course, if we really tweak these, so turning that diffusion on with all of these delay taps running can give you some big, nice, smeared kind of ambient reverb, ambient delay kind of sounds, which are great for those volume swells. So, you know, that's something to bear in mind and not something worth sniffing at. We also have the high cut and the low cut for the repeats. So if I turn this way, way down, sure, I'll just turn this all the way up, just so we can hear exactly what's going on. So these kind of function exactly as you would think they would. Grand. Now we have the drive. And again, that functions kind of exactly as we would think it would. One thing I would say that makes this and a lot of these really unique is if I turn this tempo, the first tempo down to none, and then pull this all the way down to 1 millisecond. So that's pretty cool, right? And what we're getting there is we're getting basically a real-time driven guitar. Actually, let me just turn this up a tiny little bit. I'll probably regret that in a minute, but anyway. And so we have the thing here to remember, though, is that all of these delays are being distorted. So, you know, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. So I'm just going to put this back down here for a second. And put this back to a quarter. Yeah. And we'll hit it one more time. And actually, I'm going to just put this super duper slow, just so we can hear a little bit more clearly. Now, I'm going to show you, oh, and actually, before I do that, just so we can quickly see here, we also have individual modulation for all of these, for all 4 of the taps. Right now it's set to LFO1 master, which means whatever I set here is going to be copied basically onto all of these. If I want to set them separately, I have to turn it off. But I'll just leave it on for right now and put this on to something just kind of nice. Okay, now we need to talk a little bit about this page, because this page actually is a lot weirder than it initially seems. So what is actually going on here? And I said to you that there's 4, it's like having 4 delay blocks. So when you first look at this, you think to yourself, aha. So if I put this to quarter note, I'm just going to turn the rest of these down. And let's hear what that sounds like. Okay, that does not sound like a quarter note to me, at least any quarter note I've ever heard. What is going on? So I'm going to just do something else. I'm going to set this one that has a volume of 0 to a 16th note. And I'm going to set this one that has a volume of 0 to a 16th note. I'm going to set this one that has a volume of 0 to a 16th note. Now let's hear what happens. Okay, that's weird. I'm going to turn this feedback way up. Now look, the level here is set to 0. This is set to 16th note. Let's just see what happens. Okay. Now I'm going to set this feedback to 0 and see what happens. Actually, I'm going to set all of these feedbacks to 0, except for our quarter note. Okay, now if you're looking at this going kind of, WTF is going on here, you would be right to say that. What's going on here is if you're thinking about the delay, what's happening is the dry signal is going into these 4 delay blocks, and then the amount of dry signal that is being fed in, the amount of dry signal that is being fed through these 4 taps is set by this level here. However, we know how a delay works. What happens is the dry signal gets repeated at a certain time or speed or tempo or interval, whatever you want to say, and then gets fed back in to that tap again. And that creates the rhythm. So if you hit a note once, pop, it goes back through at the tempo that you set. Pop, 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 pop. Now, where this gets extremely weird, if you aren't expecting it, is that this level here is not the level of the repeats. This is purely the level of the, if you want to think of it the first time through, it's this level of the dry signal to the taps. What it is not is it's not the level of the fed back signal through the taps. So the level of the fed back signal through the taps is this other thing labeled feedback. So if I don't want a head to be heard at all, I have to set the feedback level to 0. Now, the first 5 times I played with this, I did not get that at all. And I actually had to go open up the manual and read it carefully a couple times to cop onto that. So if you're in here and you're trying to figure out why you're getting rhythmic delays, in the sense that you're getting, it sounds like you're getting multiple tempos added together to create those kind of pulsing rhythms, or the whatever you want to call them, and you've got the levels all turned down to 0 except for 1, well, that's why. So that's really crucial as far as understanding this thing goes. So the other thing I would say, I'm just going to put this back to something a little bit more normal. And I'm going to put our feedback up to something a little bit more normal. The other thing I would say to you is that these feedbacks represent, you have to add them again together to get the total feedback. And that sounds a little bit weird. But what I mean is that if I put this to 100 and I put this to 100, it doesn't send back 200% feedback. It sends back 100% feedback. Saying that, it's not exactly clear if I put two of them to 100, if it just makes both of them 50. So I don't really know. I could test it, but I'm assuming it probably does that. Setting one of them to 100 doesn't turn the other ones off. It probably kind of divides them by the number of them that are active or something like that. Don't take my word for it, though. You test it yourself. So now we have this back to something that's kind of normal. Let's have a listen. And sure, I might as well just turn these up. Because we're getting all of the delays, all the repeats anyway. So the big difference there, if you couldn't tell, was that the first time that you hear the eighth note and the dotted quarter and the dotted eighth is now loud. So that's the main difference of turning that level up from 0 to 100. The repeats were exactly the same. So the next thing I'd like to touch on is this tone section. Now, I set this up a minute ago to 4 different frequencies, and then I set the frequencies to be swept with an LFO. And I set the Q at something kind of normal. And let's see. Now, to me, you should be hearing, right? So where are we hearing that at all? Anybody hearing any huge filter sweeps going back and forth? Because I'm not. So again, the first time I set this thing up, I had a real head scratcher trying to figure out what exactly was going on here. And to be honest, I find this to be so incredibly counterintuitive as to be frustrating. But once you get your head around it and understand what it's doing, it's not a big deal. You just have to be aware of the situation. So I'm going to come back here actually and just turn this feedback up a little bit. So 20 plus 20 plus 20 plus 20 means we have a lot of feedback in the system right now. So remember, this is set to 40 BPM. Let me put this back up to 120 BPM. Let's hear that again. Okay, that's nice and all, but it still doesn't explain why we're not hearing the filter sweep, which we should be, right? Let's come back here, and I'm just going to hit a chord. So this is what I have controlling at LFO1. So I'm going to set LFO1 tempo to So, is anybody seeing what's going on here? These master frequency and master Q, well, specifically the master Q was set so low that even with that incredibly wide filter sweep that we had going on initially, you couldn't hear the filter because the Q was basically saying sweep the entire frequency range back and forth, which was basically the same thing as saying do nothing. So it wasn't a small narrow band of EQ sweeping across the entire frequency range. It was the entire frequency range shifting a tiny bit to the left and a tiny bit to the right if you're used to looking at kind of an EQ curve. And so you can't really hear what you're doing. Well, I mean, it's very difficult to hear the effect of any of these knobs unless you come in here and tweak this. So that again is completely and utterly counterintuitive, and I almost think that this cue should be set higher just so people hear what it does, and when they start tweaking it, or else that tone section is going to be a complete and utter mystery to them. Saying that, once you have it set up, it's pretty cool, right? And if I come back in here for a second, just set these all back to none. So when I do this, let's see what happens. Now this sounds quite different than it did before, and the reason is that I have adjusted the Q back here and made it a lot more extreme, which means that suddenly these settings are a lot more obvious. So if I come back here, let's just go back to here. So that's pretty cool, right? And those knobs suddenly become extremely, extremely powerful. Worst blues ever. I do think that once you understand exactly what's going on with that master Q and master frequency and how they're basically set when you turn this thing on to do nothing, or as close to nothing as matters, it'll give you a lot more control and a lot more kind of ability to yourself get cool sounds out of this thing once you know what to turn. So I hope that this has been a good introduction into all of this. If you want to know what the ducker does, there's a whole video I have made that's on YouTube or available through the Fractal forum that explains all of this in depth. So I hope that this all makes sense to everybody, and I hope it gives people the courage to go into this thing and start twisting some knobs. Just remember that the level is the amount of clean signal that goes through that tap the first time through. The feedback is the amount of fed back signal that goes through that tap as it repeats. So if you remember that, then this really isn't that difficult to get your head around. Now, in practice, it can still be pretty confusing. So anyway, if you have any questions about this, please come onto the Fractal forum and ask. I'm going to make a series of these, like I said. So this is just the very first one. The next one we'll look at are the Plex ones, and I'll make a separate video of that, which will be coming very soon. Okay, thanks a lot for all the kind words and all the feedback and all the likes and all the watches. If you have any requests or have any complaints or confusion, please just contact me, ask me questions, let me know, and I will answer them as best I can. All right, see you guys soon.